Today I'm going to spend more time on a microphone because there is a history here that I can go through a little bit stronger by showing you. So we know crowns, flags, etc. But most people don't know contracts, estates, shareholders, stakeholders, boards of directors, ministers, House of Representatives, senators, the executive branch. So there are all these things at play that no one actually looks at. And for all these things to have been sealed in that estate requires for you to see it through a great seal process. And this seal is very, very pertinent to a line of authority, isn't it? Because it's like a signet ring that someone seals their coat of arms down with. And if this great seal changes and its line of authority is titled, then would that not signify something important has occurred? Something very, very dire might have occurred that no one's aware of. So after being pushed out, a specific change is made because someone refused to resign. So when we look at this further, someone came in post-fact and pushed for university education and the arts. So we see film and television. Australian film and television is created and they start to produce films like The Man from Snowy River. And this is where you were able to start telling your history on screen as well as being educated at a low cost. This was all set up in the throes of this action occurring, and in this change of Great Seal might actually show you very, very specifically who did what and when and how. And when you link these things back, we now have to look into a motherland and do the same. Who did what and when and how. These connections are very relevant given that some agreements were made in 1917 that led to some treaties being made in 1921, 22, 23, leading to some imperial conference 1926, after sitting down at some sort of meeting 1930, leading to this full separation occurring. And what I'd like to show you is some indications of this beforehand and after, because we looked at Menzies speaking, and we'll publish that again even though it's a copyrighted video. We need to use it to demonstrate a specific thing here, in that he's operating on behalf of something that is directly visible in Australian historical record, with a gap in the middle, big gap in the middle that everyone wants to ignore, right? While a machine overrules that sovereignty by believing that they're allies. Instead, they're not. They're debtors to this something, which when we correlate the dates, then we can see that behind closed doors, something's going on. Now, when we look back in time, we looked at the words of Robert Menzies in the black and white. He speaks of something in the Americas, and he speaks of this communism in the West. So we see this struggle in between where he then admits to joining something that might be involved with that America. But he's then tripped up in his words to talk about the crown. So we need to look at history and what that was in that time. And the easiest way to do that is to look at Stalin and this communism ideology that Menzies was talking about. Without going too much into history, you can read for yourselves. Stalin took over from Lenin after Lenin's death in 1924 and started this communist ideology because of this financial collapse that happened in the 20s. And we see that with the change of empire and the treaties revolving the separation of Ireland, 1923. So his communist ideology, Marxism, Leninism, through the Communist International and supported European anti-fascist movements. In 1939, his regime signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany, enabling the Soviet invasion of Poland. Germany broke the pact by invading the Soviet Union in 1941, leading Stalin to join the United Nations. So we can see that something here was triggered over a financial position which drew this Stalinistic communism into the United Nations.
Australia, some people say, is trailing at the heels of imperialist America.
Menzies speaks very clearly of American imperialism and communism. So where did this American imperialism rise from by 1940? Let's just have a look at some dancing around here at the Chicago World's Fair 1933.
With hopes of freedom, happiness, and peace.
So this pageant put together with these hundreds of people at the Chicago World's Fair 1933 was put together by Chaim Weissman. There is a linking history here that we will get to, but this is the initial creator of this pageant. With Stalin on the other side of the world, sort of watching this growing, and Menzies mentioning it as American imperialism, we look at what Wikipedia has to say, but some history in relation to this Soviet side. Stalin promoted Marxist-Leninism abroad through the Communist International and supported European anti-fascist movements. In 1939, his regime signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So we have this agreement to invade, and then something happens to turn on the agreement to invade that agreeing party. The Soviet Union, which had annexed the Baltic states and territories from Finland and Romania amid the war, established Soviet-aligned governments in Central and Eastern Europe. Following the war, the Soviet Union and the United States emerged as global superpowers and entered into a period of tension known as the Cold War, otherwise known as a financial war. Stalin presided over post-war reconstruction or rehabilitation after agreeing to be party to this United Nations, this rehabilitation agreement system. During these years, the country experienced another famine and state-sponsored anti-Semitic campaign culminating in the Doctors' Plot. Stalin's rule was marked by forced transfers of entire populations. Before, during, and after World War II, various social classes and ethnic groups were accused of being anti-Soviet and deported to remote parts of the country. The Doctors' Plot was a Soviet state-sponsored anti-Semitic campaign and conspiracy that alleged a cabal of prominent medical specialists, predominantly of Jewish ethnicity, intended to murder leading government and party officials. It was also known as the case of saboteur doctors or killer doctors. In 1951 to 1953, a group of mostly Jewish doctors from Moscow were accused of a conspiracy to assassinate Soviet leaders. This was later accompanied by publications of anti-Semitic character in the media, which talked about the threats of Zionism and condemned people with Jewish surnames. So when we look at this Zionism and we look at how this nation state came about in the first place, we look at Tzipi Livni, the defense minister of Israel's father, Eitan Livni. Now, we can see here that he is instrumental in several terrorist acts in 1944 through 1946. So this bargaining agreement for a mandate for Palestine, when the Irgun proclaimed the Jewish insurgency in Mandatory Palestine in February 1944, he was put in charge of the Irgun activities and was later appointed to the General Headquarters as Chief Operations Officer. He was arrested on the April 4th, 1946 for his participation in the sabotage operation against British Palestine railroads called the Night of the Trains, where an Irgun fighter, 2 British and 4 Arabs were killed, which was along with the Night of the Airfields and the Night of the Bridge, which led a forceful British retaliation and 2 weeks later, Operation Agatha. He was sentenced together with his comrades to 15 years imprisonment, but was freed 2 years later in the Acre prison break. He was sent clandestinely to Europe to organise action against British targets there. So when we look back at this Chaim Weissman, a Russian-born biochemist, Zionist leader and Israeli statesman who served as president of the Zionist organization and later as the first president of Israel. He was elected on the 16th of February 1949 and served until his death in 1952. Weissman was instrumental in obtaining the Balfour Declaration of 1917 and convincing the United States government to recognize the newly formed State of Israel in 1948. Now, you should look further into the mandate for Palestine, mandatory Palestine that we talked about before. As a biochemist, Weizmann is considered to be the father of industrial fermentation. He developed the acetone butanol ethanol fermentation process, which produces acetone, N-butanol, and ethanol through bacterial fermentation. His acetone production method was of great importance in the manufacture of cordite explosive propellants for the British war industry, the industrial military complex, during World War I, which is why he was able to manipulate that situation to become the mandate for Palestine. And there is no doubt that there is finances behind, but now you're linking biochemistry to a doctor's plot at which was warned about from this Soviet side, the communist side, when Menzies is also talking about this American imperialist side.
Australia, some people say, is trailing at the heels of imperialist America. All I need say is that Australia is British and has a great and tried and common family allegiance under the Crown. But Australia knows, and so do the communists, that the closest concert between the United States and the British Commonwealth is vital to the common defence. We will work incessantly to strengthen this great association, just as the communist powers and their overseas friends will work incessantly to divide and destroy it. Common family allegiance under the Crown, under the Crown, under the Crown.
So on Tuesday, the 19th of December 2023, something did happen in the Parliament that saw to 200 ministers sitting down to all sign a document. This article, current and former politicians sign letters supporting Palestinians and calling for government to review relationship with Israel. More than 200 current and former Liberal, Labor and Greens politicians, including 2 former foreign ministers, have signed a letter calling on the Australian government to examine its relationships with Israel. The letter, organised by New South Wales Greens MP Jenny Leong and New South Wales Labor Upper House member Anthony D'Adam, calls for a ceasefire and pledges support for Palestinians whose signatories say have been grossly violated. So we're talking about some sort of international agreement that might have been violated. And this is on the 19th of December 2023. Ms. Leong said she welcomed the Albanese government's vote in the United Nations and urged it to heed all of the points in the statement. This cross-party statement, supported by elected representatives of all political stripes and from across the country, highlights that there is a widespread feeling in our community that the horrific escalation of the situation in Palestine cannot be disconnected from the systematic and long-term oppression which numerous respected human rights organisations have condemned, she said.
The time has therefore come when we must present, so far as we humanly can, a common front backed by a common power. The free world cannot continue to negotiate from weakness or unpreparedness. With all the goodwill in the world, and with the most heartfelt desire to make an end of war, we must be ready to meet it if it comes.
So we already discussed the use of great seals, and the past can teach us a bit about the future. And we can see that through our own National Archives, we've got evidence of the Great Seal, and through the newspaper record, we can also see that evidence. But with this world situation going on, and Menzies talking about some sort of threat that looms, we can see that in 1971, a change to this executive branch of government occurred. This was done by a man called Paul Hasluck. We can see Hasluck was elected to federal parliament for the Liberal Party, winning the division of Curtin in 1951. Less than 2 years after entering politics, he was made Minister for Territories in the Menzies government. And this leads to native title and the ACT and Northern Territory being managed by some sort of external power. So we've discussed the Great Seal, and we've discussed how some sort of seal was formed under a royal warrant 1973 and put into use. But this connection to Paul Hasluck comes relative to this seal and the 18th of December 1973. So exactly 50 years later, to the day, 200 ministers of the Commonwealth Parliament joined together to say something about this money master. So that was fun, wasn't it? A little bit of a look into some sort of evil past that still looms around and puts you into some sort of delusion while it rips you off. And this game is finally twisting around so that they lose this ability to put people into some sort of debt bondage. Or is that the case? We'll find out. But this is an interesting look at 1972, a 50-year agreement, a post-agreement. Now this brings 100 years onto the table. So we should look at the Great Seal and look at how this is all twisted around, and then look at a few things in relation to a flag, and how that actually came to be the national flag of a national government, and why an engineer's case would discuss your federal capacity over and above that national government.
This is not a question of colour or race. It's a question of the maintenance of democratic freedom. So far as we are concerned in Australia, we must determine our own attitude and put it beyond doubt. We will become contributing parties. We will, in association with other nations acting similarly, accept military obligations, in support of our membership.
So back in 1902, the Governor-General was of the British or English lineage. So a Union Jack flag was issued to the Governor-General's office back in 1902. This displays this British imperial crown with a six-pointed star and a laurel wreath inside a ring over the top of the Union Jack. At the formation of the Constitution, military men were already flying this federal flag, a standard and not an ensign. They were light horsemen and military on the ground, land warfare. So they displayed a flag that we can see here looking around the country, you'll find quite a few examples of this being brought home around 1915 through 1918. At the formation of the Commonwealth by its constitution, the people were asked to design a flag. Having already had a land flag, eventually a federal flag was adopted as the national flag. And you can see here on this magazine cover that design, but in blue. So this is the actual first flag. Managed to find an actual photo of it. And you can see the six-pointed star, and you can see it's been adopted from the federal flag. But we can see that it received no royal warrant or assent from this imperial Queen Victorian realm. And when they went through this process, it was defined that a 9-pointed star was not to be used on water. We can see by this letter the mention of this 9-pointed star and its misuse. Eventually, a royal warrant is issued 1903, and the national government is given its national flag and its civil merchant ensign, both for use on waters. In 1907, the government enters into the Hague Conventions, a debt agreement, a borrowing, a lender's agreement. This sees the Governor-General's flag change from a 6-pointed star to a 7-pointed star. We can see then by Admiralty orders that a change is made to the national flag. And whereas it has been represented to us that it is desirable, 6-pointed star aforementioned should be substituted a white 7-pointed star representing the 6 federated states of Australia and the territories of the Commonwealth. Now, in 1924, we've already gone through the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles, and we're leading up to imperial conferences. But the Prime Minister's Department issues the flying of flags. Instructions for the flying of flags on various occasions were issued by the acting Prime Minister in January 1924. Those relating to action to be taken ashore were as follows. On shore, the Commonwealth flag, the British blue ensign defaced by the stars of the Southern Cross constellation on the flag, and a 7-pointed star in the lower canton, all stars in white, is flown at Commonwealth public buildings and establishments. The flying of the Commonwealth blue ensign is reserved for Commonwealth government use, but there is no reservation in the case of the Commonwealth merchant flag or red ensign, the British red ensign defaced by stars, as in the Commonwealth blue ensign, a British ensign defaced by stars. In 1931, however, the Statute of Westminster is drawn up, and Australia is defined as being disconnected from governance in London. Use of white and blue ensigns on shore. Memorandum on the use of the white and blue ensigns on shore. The white and blue ensigns of His Majesty's fleet are purely maritime flags, and in general their use on shore is incorrect. There has, however, been a customary extension to the use of the white ensign from the harbour ship, the flag ship, used as a fleet establishment to barracks and other buildings on shore, serving the same purpose. So we can see that a flip has occurred here in that this blue ensign of the British naval is now reversed into the white ensign of this Royal Australian Naval. We already discussed HMAS Australia as being this head ship in the harbour, so we can see a connection here. The white ensign is nothing else but the national colours of a ship of war in commission. So it would turn to its blue ensign when it entered hostilities. Now, we already discussed the abdication of the throne in London at the request of Canada in the Mankind video. But what we can see here is that this British ensign is removed from the Governor-General's flag, and this becomes a sovereign position in the Commonwealth. We are now severed at law in the Statute of Westminster. We are now severed militarily in the League of Nations and then imperial conferences. And now we fast forward to abdication of the throne in London, leaving some sort of Victorian Melbourne ideology on the ground here, which then gets to display this imperial crown as defined already in the Supreme Court of New South Wales case with Justice Lonergan. We can see that having no connection to this British ensign here defines this to be disconnected from, at a spiritual level, the motherland. So again, another lengthy video to go through. So I chuck some bank account details up and thank everyone that has donated and thank everyone that is going to donate. The support is appreciated as we start to put together some more difficult and more complicated viewpoints here of the historical record.
The time has therefore come when we must present, so far as we humanly can, a common front backed by a common power.
There is a whole linking here that goes to declaration of war on behalf of London in 1939 without parliamentary approval here in Australia. This could be seen as acting on behalf of foreign interests at this point. We see Robert Menzies here alluding to all of this being forced at hand after this abdication. Now, on the 25th of March 1941, again, this flag flying is brought up, and this is where Menzies tries to mind manipulate the population out of their land flag to fly this national flag instead. Inquiries have frequently been made recently about the flying of the Commonwealth flag in Australia and the correct procedure to be followed when it is flown. It was explained officially today that there are two official flags in use as far as the Commonwealth is concerned. The blue ensign, the British blue ensign defaced by the stars of the Southern Cross and the seven-pointed star, and the Commonwealth red ensign, the British red ensign defaced by stars as in the Commonwealth blue ensign. The Commonwealth blue ensign is flown by vessels of the Royal Australian Navy and on Commonwealth public buildings, while the Commonwealth red ensign, the merchant flag of the Commonwealth, is flown on all merchant vessels on the Australian Registry and is used also by the general public out on the waters. The official view is that there should be no unnecessary restriction placed on the flying of the blue ensign on shore. This is in direct contradiction to the orders issued 1931 after Statute of Westminster. There seems to be some sort of undermining going on here, in that you're being told to flip this again. So I'm just lightly skipping over this. In 1953, this Governor General's flag changes again, except this time it changes by crown. Now, we looked at the Great Seal being something else other than the Great Seal of the Commonwealth, and we know that Queen Elizabeth II used the proper Great Seal up until 1973-72. There are a lot of changes in government after that seal changes, but at a royal level, this crown comes and changes something a little bit higher than the Constitution. We can see this by this introduction of a Flags Act 1954 and Royal Powers 1954, determining the powers of the Governor-General by some line of authority that exists in London. This is all now questionable, given that the coat of arms was removed off Buckingham Palace, and Buckingham Palace was seen vacated for some time, and the fact that London has technically fallen. Being part of Great Britain, it demonstrates something in relation to an old, long-running debt.
The free world cannot continue to negotiate from weakness or unpreparedness. With all the goodwill in the world, and with the most heartfelt desire to make an end of war, we must be ready to meet it if it comes.
As we have seen by this leader of the free world in the President of the United States, some sort of Abraham Lincoln-based citizenship model might have something to do with it. Being in a position of being unable to negotiate means that you are put in a position to pay up. Pew, 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 pay up. Pew, 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 pay up. So we have this British currency. We can see here by the George VI collection and the Royal Standard on the half crown that this is relative to Great Britain as a style and title. But we can see moving forward in time, when Australia is in the demise of currency 1965, a change to decimal takes place when administration moves right in and starts counting the little beans in the tin. And we can see here that Australian currency is of its own. What we can see is that our currency tells a story. We have our coat of arms and a coat of arms change with a crown on the top and a date and a weighted metal or mixture of metals as opposed to money. So we look at currency versus money. Now, when we look at this, it actually relates to a loan, and that loan was for the Nullarbor Railway or the Trans-Australian Railway. And you can see here that it's one of the most important projects of national infrastructure in the last century. We look at 1,692 kilometres of line was completed on the 17th of October 1917. And this last point here, the railway building project was funded through loans provided by overseas investors, with the legacy of interest on the loans being carried by succeeding generations. the money was invested on the basis that the governments of the colonies built and guaranteed the railways. And this is incorrect because they were states, and this would have been a Commonwealth project. So it had nothing to do with the colonies. This whole entire project was incepted and legislation passed in 1907. Wikipedia here is more correct than the National Archives. In 1901, the 6 Australian colonies federated to form the Commonwealth of Australia. At that time, Perth, the capital of Western Australia, was isolated from the rest of the continent. This loan agreement might have then included the Hague Conventions, and this brought on a whole rule set that Australia became signatory to in 1910. And we can see here by this chart of money that the currency started in 1910, was reprinted in 1911, and that all surrounds circulating currency around this railway project. Money's not printed again until 1938, and then you can see that this crown is held on this currency all the way through till 1963. So even though the coins might have consecutive year dates on them, that there are certain reprints of different coins through the years, and the biggest change here is from 1951 through to 1963. We can see that before 1938, the king is crowned, and after 1938, the coat of arms is crowned and not the king. This all relates to this abdication of the throne. Interestingly, we can see George V crowned on the centenary of Victoria's city of Melbourne, 1934 to 35, taking it back to 1834-35, and the coronation of Queen Victoria in a city named after Lord Melbourne, her most trusted advisor. After the formation of the King's seat of government under Section 125, the Parliament was constructed and opened. We can see here 2 King's sceptres below a picture of Parliament House, showing a seashell at the top, demonstrating some sort of Admiralty seat of the King in this national place. So if we take into consideration what's being administered here by Great Seal, we should be able to see that all of these things are valid at once. They all match up. The federal standard that was forming the national flag in the first place, the national flag, and the civil merchant flag or Admiralty merchant flag for use on water. So we have a Admiralty side and a land side to this kingdom, this nationality, and this sovereignty wrapped up in one package. But what we see here is a loan, a borrowing, and this scheme that manages this debt and forces this upon you so that you are enslaved to pay it back. This would then put an administrator in play and slowly grind away at your sovereignty and possibly push a republic on you. See, so when we look at things, it's a bit more than a fancy hat, isn't it? It's a bit more than all of this flag a flag. It's you actually realising they're bankrupting you. It's you realising that this machine has turned into a communism like 1939 because of the debt will set you free ideology that is being pushed upon you by those eugenicist types. And you can see them very openly now as all those CEOs start collapsing out of existence. And it'll grow wider as this, did he do it? Did he did it? Collapses more than just the music industry, Hollywood, American politics, and that far-reaching Great Seal all around the world, right? Because that's what aiding and abetting is, isn't it? That's what complicity and common purpose is, isn't it? When you relate it to a Great Seal and modus operandi behind that Great Seal, that would be the common purpose, wouldn't it? That would be the conspiring, wouldn't it? That would be all these things at law that the justices of your Supreme Court might acknowledge because they're very real. It can only mean administration of the estate, right? Because they pushed out a government, didn't they? And their roots are in Menzies, aren't they? And there's a history and a change in the motherland, isn't there? Both before sovereignty and after being chained back. Being chained back. With all these crimes being committed under command responsibility. Okay, so the sun starts to go down. That was a difficult edit. That's taken me quite a few hours. So you can see there's a lot of aspects that revolve around a country. Our people, who you are, what you represent, how things changed, what caused them to change, how that money lender might have an effect on that change, how that led to this pew 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 pew, pew 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 pew, have a fine, and how that turned into human slavery, and how this wheel turned slowly crunching, and it might have something to do with these republicanists that are undermining everything, which we can talk about next, because we need to look at how this turned from this 1939-40. You saw the two atlases with the change in 1940, how this education manipulation came around under International Covenant 1939, and how that's all being mind fractured right now because you've been put into this deluded state by people that have manipulated your history on purpose. Continue to delete it around you today in what you all call a Mandela effect. No, it's the people in command right now removing the history so that you forget, lest ye forget. And we can see that money forms a greater part of war, and the inability to manage that money, Frydenberg, might have something to do with that. If we go back in time, we can see that the people have been EBA, Tony Abbott, enterprise bargaining agreements. We saw Fair Work Australia, Michael Lawler, cretin that ran off with $1 million. We saw his wife manipulate the unions. We saw Setka manipulate the unions. We saw the unions manipulate the land title and the health care. So we can see this connection to what was discussed previously about you as a family and your bloodlines. And that's a very important thing when it comes to lest ye forget where you came from, who you are, how that's all connected together, and how this now scriptural foundation links it all together to give you this sovereign position in international law so that your defense force can defend what is you and not what's outside of you, which you start to see through this Securities Act and what happened in Soldiers Field.
With hopes of freedom, happiness, and peace.